Okay, so let me start out by explaining who I am and what I'm doing with this video. I'm Karen Hudis, and I have a very important job, although I'm just one of the pack. The important job that I have is I'm the lawyer for the world's gold, and I've been working at this job for many, many years, and it turns out that I've been in preparation for this job even longer. I was brought into the World Bank legal department because of a paper that I wrote when I was in law school. I wrote that paper between just the year before I graduated in 1976. And what it was about what I saw going on at the United Nations. I was working at that time for UNCTAD, and what I did was I saw that there was a group of developing countries that were taking over, and it turns out that that group of developing countries was headed by Ferdinand Marcos. And then I tried many, many years after I worked at the, since graduation in 76, which is when I graduated. I worked for many, many years in various places, including I had studied in Holland, and that was one of the reasons why I was bound and determined to work for the United Nations, because I realized that the developing countries were important, were very important. Let me get to the beginning, and then we'll go forward, because it's always better to let people know where they're headed. I was hired into the World Bank legal department in 1986 by a lawyer, an Egyptian lawyer named Dr. Ibrahim Shihada, and he hired me because I was one of the very few people who understood what the World Bank was. And I didn't come to this understanding in the very beginning, but as a lawyer, you look at the documents for an organization, and I looked at the Articles of Agreement of the World Bank, and I actually was very critical of Dr. Shihada because I thought he was ignoring some of the important provisions, which I later found out. Well, Dr. Shihada, in addition to being an Egyptian lawyer, he had been the general counsel of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. He was in the Middle East, and I was always very, very interested in the Middle East, and that's one of the things I'll talk about. But let's get back to the punchline. I'm the lawyer for the world's gold, and that's because the World Bank was created. It was created in 1944. It was created so that there could be a peaceful transition from the corruption that had been in the world since the previous ice age. That's right. I'm not talking about 5,700 years, which is what we've been told is the beginning of history. No, it's back to the age of the pyramids. And we can age the pyramids if we look at the map that people who built the pyramids drew of the sky. When you see how the stars have moved, you understand that that pyramid was over 10,000 years old. And one of the things that I've learned is that talking about 10,000 years, why is it that we've got such a misunderstanding of history? There's a group in Moscow State University. Fomenko is the name of the mathematician who's published a series of books, 6 books actually I've got and I've been reading, and it's talking about how the years that we're told that the events happened in history were actually much different. So the Middle Ages, that's when Aristotle and Plato lived, in the Middle Ages. Ever since the 1600s, any of the original documents to show what happened in history have been destroyed. They've been destroyed by the Jesuits. The Jesuits have played a very important role in history. They've been, if you look at what the role of history and the Jesuits, they were actually above the popes. They killed what are called the white popes. The black pope was the most powerful of all. And there was a black pope named Jose Rizal, who he was there at the very end of World War II. And what he did was he took the wealth of the Vatican, the world's gold, which had been collected over many, many years, and he melted it down at the end of World War II, and he stamped it, and then he deposited it in the World Bank. He created the World Bank for that reason. The World Bank was created in 1944. And the lawyer who was working for Jose Rizal and did that was Ferdinand Marcos. Now, I found all of this information out over many, many years, and I've documented it. I had a series on DCTV, which started in 2015, and it went until just relatively recently. It was suspended by DCTV, and then I later found out that one of the people who had been very involved in the production of my series was a Jesuit. And he was working behind the scenes, I later found out, in a way to try to sabotage it. Many of the the graphics that I wanted to run, he wouldn't run them. But let me get to, I'm going to be skipping around, but let me get actually to the punchline. This is one of the last videos, if not the final video that I'm going to do, and it's not going to be distributed by DCTV. And I'm not even sure if I'm going to be allowed to put it up on YouTube on my channel. Although many of the videos in that series are still up on YouTube. YouTube is part of a very corrupt organization. This organization, it's the one that owns all of the mainstream media. We've been living in a very corrupt world, and that's the purpose, actually, of this video. But I want to describe the corruption, but I also want to describe the solution, because there is a solution to the corruption. And first, let's pin the blame on who the corrupt people are. It's something called the black nobility. They've been in power ever since the previous ice age. They're the ones that were in power when the pyramids were built 10,000 years ago, which is what I've told you. The pyramids were built 10,000 years ago, and we can accurately date this by looking at a map that the people who built the pyramid etched on the ceiling of one of the chambers of the old pyramids. Now, and I've also told you that our understanding of history is very wrong, and that in Moscow State University, Mr. Fomenko has published a series of books that explains what some of these discrepancies are. But actually, I'm going to start with the punchline of this video, which is that we're victorious against this corruption. And the way I know this is because of what happened when I tried to continue to brief you. You know, I've been very active on the internet, and in many cases, these things I've been tweeting on Twitter. I've had things on Facebook. I had this YouTube series. They're all being hidden, and so that's actually a clue to you. Who's hiding this? And what I was telling you about the mainstream media being owned by this corrupt group, and that I've been studying, working with many people to figure out what this corruption was. Well, and then I've told you that the corruption is ending. Some of the people I've been working with, that group is called the critical mass. And what it is, it turns out that humanity is very different from what we've been told. We haven't been told that we have immortal souls. There's a doctor who's proven this, actually. He's my physician, and the way I found him, actually, I'll describe a little bit about myself so that you understand what my qualifications are for the role that I have as the lawyer for the world's gold. One of the qualifications is that I'm quite intuitive. And so I found this doctor by accident because I am very intuitive. This is Dr. Charles Gant, and he's written a very important book which proves scientifically that we have 4 brains, and when you do various tests, I think PET scans are one of them, you can figure out who's using all 4 parts of the human brain. And the most important part is called the hypothalamus. This is a part of the brain which looks at all the other parts to evaluate them, to see whether we're using all of our 4 brains. And the very first brain, the most rudimentary brain, that's the brain which humanity has evolved over thousands and thousands of years. And the very first brain that we had is something called a reptilian brain, which is, that's the brain that the reptiles have, and they're very hierarchical. And you can see who's using their reptilian brain and whether their reptilian brain is being guided by the other chambers. And if it also turns out that most politicians are working from just the reptilian brain. And when people work just from the reptilian brain, they're interested in hierarchies, and they're the ones that march like fascists. You know how the fascists march. And they're most of the politicians that are elected are unfortunately using just the reptilian brain. They're only interested in hierarchies. They'll be very loyal to the members of their family, and that's it. They will not. They're not going to have something called altruism. They're not going to have empathy. They're not going to be looking at humanity universally. They're also the ones that are going to be racist. The reptilian brain is racist. Now, I was telling you that we actually have a nice ending to this story, and that is that Dr. Gant has written a book about the godly brain and how you can find out whether politicians are going to be dishonest and fascist, and whether you shouldn't allow people like that to enter into politics, because they're not going to be representing all of the people. They're not going to represent people of different races. And one of the things that we've discovered, I told you about the black nobility. We discovered who the people are that are trying to dominate and take over and own the mainstream media. These people, many of them are royalty. They're, and the countries themselves have been hijacked. We're living in a very corrupted world. All of the countries are not what their people have been educated to believe. The universities actually have been lying. When you go to a university and you get a degree, you're being given the storyline from the mainstream media, which, as I've told you before, is not accurate. It's not truthful. And when you look at how professors are selected with tenure, that's in order to weed out the independent people who are actually being scientific. They want to make sure that people are given the wrong information. Homeschooling is actually a very good thing because the people that are educating their own children are not necessarily going to follow the storyline of the mainstream media, which, as I've told you, is not truthful. So now I did take some notes, and I wanted to get to the punchline, which is why I'm convinced now that the black nobility is has lost, and that's because what happened is they tried to close me down. They tried to censor me. They tried to kick me off the internet. They tried to fix it so that all of my emails would have inaccurate passwords. They cut my landline. And the last thing they did was they stole, or they tried to steal, my passport because I was planning on going on a trip. I thought maybe we were going to have a meeting and correct some of these wrongs. And that's when I learned that things aren't going to happen the way I was hoping. Although I am the lawyer for the world's gold, and many of the people in the militaries know this. And how do I know that? I did take notes just so that I would have the right dates. And that is in 2017, there was a Marine Expeditionary Unit in November 2017 that, what did they do? They occupied the CIA. And it turns out that the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, you think they're part of the United States government, but the United States government is not what we thought. The Constitution of the United States has been suspended. It was suspended by the bankers. It was suspended by the bankers in 1871 at the end of the Civil War. That was when Lincoln was assassinated. Lincoln was assassinated because he wanted to print currency that wasn't issued by the central bank. That's the very heart of the crooks. The crooks are the ones that print paper money, central bankers. Money is not paper. Money is actually something quite different. When you're a central banker and you can print, for example, Federal Reserve notes, what is the difference between what you can buy for the currency and what it costs? It doesn't cost anything in many cases. The dollars in the Federal Reserve that are issued electronically, so it doesn't cost them anything, and yet they can go and they can buy things that are worth a lot of money. So the central bankers, and as I said, Lincoln was assassinated because he was trying to print currency without giving it to the black nobility. They're the ones that are corrupt. So I was telling you, how do I know that the black nobility has lost, and they've been corrupt ever since the previous ice age. How do I know that they've lost? Well, it's because they finally gave up. They realized that enough people know about the corruption, because I haven't just been the only one educating people. This problem about COVID-19, that was the attempt of the black nobility to try to actually win. But in the meantime, enough people knew about the extent of the corruption that we've reached something called critical mass. Now I'm going to change the subject just a little bit to a political scientist named Jacek Kugler. Jacek Kugler, he developed a model which he then brought to the United States National War College, which is 90 to 95% accurate, and it predicts how coalitions will form. And Jacek Kugler then came to me when I was in the World Bank, and he made that model available to me. And he had a hard time, actually, because the military tried to prevent him from claiming his own model. But he went and showed that the model existed in a different version than the one that he had produced for the National War College. And so when I was in the World Bank legal department, I could see how the coalitions were forming, and I started working with Jacek Kugler, and Jacek Kugler allowed me, and he realized that we had a very big job ahead of us, because what his model showed was that we were going to have a war, a nuclear war in the Middle East. And what happened was, when I started working with Jacek Kugler, that war never materialized, because we started working with the coalitions that could prevent World War III. What is that coalition? One of them is the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And then I took Jacek Kugler's model with me to a group called Nexus. I was invited to a conference at Nexus. So what happened was, I started working with various coalitions independently of the black nobility. I started working with the World Bank's whistleblowers. I went up the corporate ladder. When you're working inside an organization and you're the lawyer, you do what the lawyer's supposed to do. And so I did what I was supposed to do in the World Bank legal department. And first I was working with the man who hired me, Ibrahim Shihada. But then Ibrahim Shihada left, and I was working with other lawyers. But in the meantime, I realized that there was a lot of corruption in the World Bank legal department. And so I started trying to develop my own coalitions. Well, I didn't develop a strong enough coalition, and I didn't get through to the BRICS, because there were other people that were part of the BRICS that were part of the government. And it turns out that all of the governments are corrupt. The corruption, because I told you, money is the source of this corruption, paper money. You just have to print the currency and then bribe the politicians, and you can stay in power. But in the meantime, I was developing other coalitions. I was standing outside of the black nobility. I was working together with with other whistleblowers inside of the World Bank. And I'll tell you some of the other people, because I went up the corporate ladder. And then when I discovered the extent of the corruption, I didn't stop. I just kept going because one of the things about me is that I'm very stubborn, and I thought that there had to be a solution. And actually, I later found out what that solution is, but it happened much, much later. So let me tell you what the solution is. I was working with other people on the internet, and two of the most important people, because I told you we're looking at coalitions, the two of the people who have helped me the most, they're people who came back from the dead, who were dead, and then they survived again. Some people are like that. Now, I didn't come back from the dead. What happened to me was in my teenage years, I'll tell you, I took a trip, an acid trip, and I went up a spiral staircase, and then I saw Jesus Christ. And that made a very big impression on me. So after that happened, I realized, although I'm Jewish, I saw Jesus Christ, so I had to make sense of it. And after law school, what I did was I looked at out the window, and the church across me was a Lutheran church, and I went and I sang in the Lutheran choir for many years, and I became baptized. So I was something that you call a completed Jew, and yeah, that's what I am. I'm Jewish. It turns out I'm 100% Jewish. And the reason I know that I'm 100% Jewish is that my older sister did a genetics test, and they can tell what your bloodline is. And it turns out every single one of the people in my ancestors were Jewish. So, but then I found out something else very interesting. I found out that, at one point I was locked up in an insane asylum, and I got out because a member of the mafia wanted to buy my rings. This ring, this is not actually mine. This is, my husband gave it to me, and it belongs to my two daughters. But this ring I inherited from my father. And the member of the mafia who let me out of the insane asylum, he wanted to buy these rings. And it turned out this little one was owned by Lucky Luciano. My father's father was the son of Lucky Luciano. And I was talking about this to one of my cousins, and she said, well, that doesn't really make sense, because Lucky Luciano wasn't your father's grandfather. Your father's grandfather was named Pincus. And that's when I realized that my great-great-grandmother, she was my great-great-grandmother, but she did not bear the child of her husband. Her husband, she was unfaithful to her husband, and the son that she bore was my father's father. And well, it turned out that my great-great-grandmother, I'm getting ahead of myself, but my father's parents were first cousins. Jews did that sometimes. And so I've got, on my father's side, the genes are double. I'm the great-great-granddaughter of Lucky Luciano. And so that's why when they tried to lock me up in an insane asylum, a member of the mafia let me out, because I was Lucky Luciano's great-great-granddaughter. Well, anyway, let me other than this pedigree, I was going to tell you how I knew that the world's wealth is going to go to the world's people. This is because of the power transition model and the fact that I've been working with these coalitions, although they won't recognize me. But there are some people on the internet who do blog. And one of these people I just spoke to a couple of days ago. Her name is Betsy Malone. And I wrote Betsy Malone a letter. And Betsy Malone, she's, I told you, she's a member of a group that there are many members of this group. There are people who died, and then they came back to life again. And so Betsy Malone, I wrote Betsy a letter, which I was going to read to you, and I was going to tell you how I know that that we're going to win. This is because they've been trying to censor me, and so Betsy, I wrote a letter to Betsy about it. I sent the attached letter to 4 of the surviving members of my mother's book club. That book club has lasted 65 years. The 5th living member is a woman named Susan Warsinger. Susan Warsinger survived Auschwitz. As a child, she gives many public speeches. Susan knows that her parents survived in the work camp that was for the manufacture of enriched uranium. Susan blamed me for the fact that she did not invite my mother to her 50th birthday party along with the other book club members. Susan is perpetuating the Holocaust lie. Judaism is being misused to divide people. Some powerful crooks are hiding behind Judaism. That's the black nobility I was telling you about. These crooks are not religious. Others have told this. Yesterday, when writing this letter, and I'll show you what the letter was, my PC started acting on its own. It did everything in reverse. We, that's including the members of the black nobility, have demanded to surrender to the forces of good in the universe. Some of the misguided military powers who are mind control, who use mind control weapons, have not gotten word. Many of them already have. My PC locked itself, and it now unlocks itself when I boot up. I only have to remember to click on the icon on my PC when it first boots up. I sent a separate picture to Susan Warsinger. It's a copy of the graphic that I used when I tweeted Divide and Conquer. Susan had mailed me a card acknowledging my mother's death. We will deal separately about the role that the Vatican has assumed. It may take some time for the dust to settle. That is what eternity is for. Okay, so let me try to explain that, what I was saying. This is the letter. I told you my mother died very recently, last week. And so I wrote to the members, the surviving members of the book club, and I didn't include Susan Warsinger. Dear Adele, Claire, Frances, Amy, and Susan, I'm writing today to let you know that my mother died early Friday morning and that she will be laid to rest on Sunday. The book club was an important part of my mother's life, and it should be celebrated as such. I'm enclosing a short piece about my mother's life and art. Thank you for being such valued and long-standing members of my mother's community at Maplewood and in Maryland. Well, what happened after my mother died was I actually did dream. It wasn't about my mother, that dream. That dream was about my mother's sixth sister, my Aunt Lila, because my Aunt Lila saved my life. When I was a teenager, I was having a huge fight with my mother because I wanted to be separate, and my mother was she was a principal in an elementary school, and she was very strict, and she wouldn't let me do what I wanted to do, and I was doing what I wanted to do because I was in puberty, and that's when you're supposed to separate from your mother. So anyway, what happened was my mother and father sent me away to live with my Aunt Lila. And at the end of the summer, by that time, I had learned how to do things behind my mother's back. So we weren't going to kill each other anymore. And actually, my two sisters, I have an older sister and a younger sister. They were always very jealous because they never separated from my mother. My older sister just always did exactly what my mother told her to. And what my younger sister did was she got into a terrible problem with my father. She, when she was 14, my father caught her and her boyfriend together in the closet. And, my younger sister's relationship with my mother and father was, my sister always snuck around after that. But anyway, about me and about what I'm telling you as being the lawyer for the world's gold, I'm honest. And so what I've done is I've tried very hard to do what I thought the legal department required. And then after Ibrahim Shihada died, I just kept doing what the World Bank required. And I went to Congress. I didn't understand that the members were all corrupt. And so I was working with Senator Lugar. And Senator Lugar, he was ultimately thrown out. And as for Congress, well, the Constitution of the U.S. has not been in effect since since the Civil War, actually, because when Lincoln was assassinated, he was assassinated because he was trying to print greenback dollars. And then the bankers took over, and they created a second secret constitution, which they didn't tell anybody about. And you can see that. It was on the internet for a number of years, and then the black nobility took it down. Most of what I've been telling you and documenting to you, you have to go back into the archives. But I've been telling you the truth, and I've been using the power transition model to keep the world out of World War III. And I've been working with the Middle East all of my career. I was the lawyer for Jordan for 10 years in the very beginning. And then I was also the lawyer for Yemen. And when I tried to stop, they were going to have a Yemen port project, which was corrupt. And when I tried to stop that corruption, they reassigned me to Nigeria. And then I was the lawyer for Nigeria, and I ran into trouble with Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who was then the Minister of Finance, because I'd been working together with other people in the Ministry of Finance who were honest. So I've just gone up the corporate ladder, and yes, I was telling you about how can we document that the U.S. Constitution isn't in effect. James Trafficant, in March 17, 1933, in the Federal Register, that's when we learned that the bankers had taken over. And after James Trafficant published this, well, he was banished from Congress. And what else can I say? Well, I don't want to read because it's not that interesting. But as I told you, there was a Marine expeditionary attack on the CIA in November 2017. What happened was some people in the military understood that they were patriots. They understood that the CIA is not really part of the government. And what I did at one point, they tried to bribe me. They issued a stock in a company, and they issued the stock to me, 1,000,000 shares of it. And what did I do? I didn't fund it. They thought that it was a diamond company. They thought that I was going to fund this company and make myself rich. And instead, what did I do? I disclosed it. And I put the shares of stock in my safety deposit box just to prove that that the CIA was dishonest. And when I was talking about this on DC TV, I was telling everybody, yeah, well, the CIA has now, it's just like what happened with a little fishing boat that's trying to catch a whale. You have to go on something called a Nantucket sleigh ride. And so I said, the fact that these shares, it was called CKM Diamond Exporting Company. I said, the fact that they tried to bribe me with CMKX Diamonds shares, this is just the Nantucket sleigh ride. At some point, enough people are going to realize that that there's this corruption, and that Nantucket sleigh ride is going to end. And that's exactly what's happened. We have reached something called critical mass, which is enough people know about all of this terrible corruption that that the black nobility realizes their time is up. There's no way they can win. But what's going to happen? That's up to us. It's up to all of us, because the fact of the matter is we still have the mainstream media. We still have the black nobility. Now, they're mortally wounded because enough people know about all this corruption. And when they loosed the COVID virus on people, people started waking up. They realized there wasn't all that much sickness. It was just a regular virus. Yeah, some old people were dying, and there were, but the numbers of deaths compared to what was it enough so that we should have a world depression. We should stop trading. We should have quarantines like this. No, of course not. This is just actually a way of waking people up. So there's no way that the black nobility is going to win. But I'll tell you, there is a way for people to have World War III. Although there are enough people in the military that know that there's all this world corruption, there are also some very powerful people who think they can still continue to pull the wool over the people's eyes. And so we're now working our way. Are enough people going to learn that the world is so corrupt and change all the corruption? That's what the critical mass is for, and that's what this video is for. I do know that there's no way for the black nobility to win. And when you reach critical mass, one of the things about humanity is that humanity is, we're all one tribe. And there's something called the 100 monkey effect, which some Japanese scientists learned. They learned that if enough monkeys found out about washing sweet potatoes in the sand, all of the monkeys of that breed, even the ones on islands, would then start washing sweet potatoes. So there is something called critical mass. That's because when people think, their brains are all interconnected. And that's how you learn about mind control, because this mind control, the scientists can figure out what people are thinking by looking at which layers of the brain are active. But they have to use supercomputers. It's very time-consuming and expensive to use mind control. So although they're trying to use mind control on me because I'm the lawyer for the world's wealth, some people resist. Just like some people can't be hypnotized, some people are more resistant to mind control. And I'm actually one of those people. So even though they're using mind control on me a lot, I still can think independently. So for example, this morning, I was trying very hard to remember the name of Paul Jenkinson, and I couldn't find it on the internet. And I finally did, because what it is that I realized that Paul Jenkinson was actually something called controlled opposition, which is to say he would pretend like he was working to fight corruption, but he was actually doing things that were corrupt. There's a lot of controlled opposition, just there to confuse people. So Lenin was controlled opposition. He was there to convince people that there was, well, he was trying to fight corruption, but he wasn't actually fighting the corruption. And the same thing for Putin. He's controlled opposition as well. So how do you know who's controlled opposition and who's real? Well, that's the problem. And so when Nestor has been trying to spread a lot of information that I've been putting out on the internet. But then I was able to show that Nestor was also controlled opposition. So I've been doing a lot of compare and contrast to figure out what the truth is, because there only is one truth. And that's when I learned, I communicated actually with my mother after her death by dreaming about my mother's younger sister who saved my life. So when I wrote the members of the book club, and then my computer was locked and then it unlocked itself, it's because the universe has chosen truth. Now, are people going to realize that the universe has chosen truth? That's really up to us. We have to get the word out that the universe has chosen truth. That's the meaning of this video. That the world's wealth is there for the world's people and the world's military. And I'm sorry, I'm not really presenting this, I guess, in the strongest way, but let me tell you about the United States Treaties of Defense. We don't have Japan doesn't have its own military. They're relying on the U.S. And the same thing for Germany. They're relying on the U.S. Now, if the U.S. doesn't have any money because the Federal Reserve notes crash, then Germany has lost, they've lost their defense, and so has Japan. So it turns out that Japan and Germany are actually part of this coalition to fight the black nobility, because Germany and Japan are interested in money. As we go forward, we're looking now at a question of immigration. We're going to have to decide whether countries are going to have the same policies. And so if they do, then there won't be places that are more advantageous for some people to live than others. We have a lot of open questions. One of the open questions is whether there's going to be free trade, which we now have, or whether we're going to have a lot of protectionism. The jury's out. It's up to all of us to decide how we want to fight this corruption. And it's going to depend. People are going to, they're going to have to learn to resist the military mind control technology. And as I've explained, about 80% of the people are very sensitive to it, and 20% are not so sensitive to it. So it's all up to us now that we've mostly learned that the mainstream media is incorrect. The COVID virus is not that deadly. What's really deadly is if we don't have international trade and we have mass unemployment. We need to decide whether we're going to have free trade or whether we're going to have mass unemployment. And the jury is open. Well, I'm getting signals that this video is probably long enough, and I think I have really told all of the story. The main thing to remember is that truth does count. We're in a world where we have to learn to separate truth from falsity, and there's a lot of corruption, and we have to work hard with our communities. And yes, I guess the most important thing is that most of the corruption is coming from paper money, and so the most important thing is for us to have real money, which is either going to be from the world's gold, or we're going to have local communities issuing their own local currencies. And as local communities fight the corruption with local currencies, they're going to work together to fight the corruption in their countries. And we're going to have to learn what the truth is and what lies are. And we have to work at it. It's not going to be handed to us. So it's all up to us. That's the bottom line. And I'm wishing everybody well. And I hope this video works. If it doesn't, I'll have to try again, because as you know, I am persistent. And thank you again for your attention.